everyone, and welcome to the Consciousness Cafe. We have an interesting conversation this evening with Elizabeth Sabet. And if you read the email that I sent around to everyone a few days before, a little bit before, maybe it was a couple days before, Elizabeth has been our go-to person for spiritual emergencies since 2020, I believe. You've been on 2 or 3 times. This is like your 3rd time you've been here with us. But spiritual development and all the different things that you go through, there's an opportunity for you to have positive experiences, but you could also have fearful experiences or traumatic experiences as well. And then as we were talking before we launched the call, you can have people shut you down. You can be fearful of talking about things, and yet 30% plus people in the country have had spiritual experiences. So there's a lot of people out there who are keeping things to themselves. But one of the things that Elizabeth does, that she started a few years back at an organization called Assist, and I'll let her tell us a little bit more about that, is helping people who have had spiritual experiences integrate those experiences into their lives. And now she has a spiritual integration coaching group or company where she does certification for spiritual integration coaching. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And it's really just an extension of some of the work that she's done through the years with helping people integrate and understand and assimilate the things that have happened to them and become more of a whole person as a result. And I hope that's a good way to start it, Elizabeth. And maybe I haven't butchered it too much, but I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you've done.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. And thanks so much for having me back. I started working with spiritual experiencers when I co-founded a community in Lubbock, Texas, not much unlike the Consciousness Cafe called Hope, Holistic Options for People Everywhere. Lubbock, Texas, where I'm from, is a highly ultra-conservative community by nature. And so if you were different from the traditional Christian, you were looked down upon, told you're going to hell. And there wasn't really a safe place to talk about your spiritual journey if it was different. And so some friends and I got together and we co-founded this community, and it lasted for a good 10 years. And we met locally here in Lubbock. We had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of events, thousands of hours of free community events. And anytime somebody had a question about something weird happening or spiritual questions, they sent them to me, simply because in this space, I had an opportunity to talk about it, right? Where before, didn't really talk about these things too much. And being a childhood experiencer myself, which I'm sure many of you are probably also childhood experiencers, you just get used to not talking about things. But so that was my beginning work with working with people with spiritual experiences and supporting them in finding grounding and safety in it. But funny enough, I didn't know that there was a term for it called spiritually transformative experiences or spiritual emergency until about 2012. When one of our community members who was going through a spiritual emergency, kicked out of her church home, as they call it here, and her husband was going to divorce her, and they wanted her committed. And she was determined to not go down without a fight. We didn't have any mental health professionals in town that she trusted to help her diagnose her spiritual emergency. And she brought me a book, The Stormy Search for Self by Stanislav and Christina Grof. And she said, you need to do something about this. Hope needs to do something about this. And I was like, she's right, because as a coach, even though I work with, I do my coaching work, but people need therapy sometimes, right? People have had a lot of trauma, and people are going through like relationship issues because of these things. And I didn't have a therapist in town that I could ethically refer somebody to, that they could safely bring their whole self into a therapy session. And so, because people withhold this information from therapists, by the way, many people withhold this. There are those that don't and get misdiagnosed. And that's a whole other conversation about differential diagnosis. But that led me to Jan Holden. Jan Holden was the only person in Texas who had been trained by Stanislav and Christina Groff. And she graciously, I wanted to host a training here. And Jan graciously came to Lubbock and did our training for mental health professionals here. And then she introduced me to Yelene Stout at Assist. And that was in 2013. So I hosted an academic conference here in Lubbock in 2013. And then in 2014, Assist invited Hope to sponsor their conference in Dallas. And then in 2015, I was invited on the board of board of Assist, and became president of Assist, where we did do annual conferences and training to train mental health professionals on differential diagnosis of spiritual emergence and emergency. And Jan Holden, who's now the president of Alliance, did the majority of that training. So through Assist, I did a lot of work with people all over the world. My scope of clientele and people that we supported shifted from local Lubbock, Texas to all over the country and all over the world. And so I've been working with experiencers formally since 2007. And in 2014, I had a paper published on the role of the coach in spiritual emergence and emergencies, and created the training program, started writing that training program in 2014, recognizing that there are a lot of people doing spiritual coaching, but may not really be familiar with the breadth and the depth of the type of experiences that they're dealing with, and just realized that there needed to be a broader education on spiritual emergence and emergency experiences so that coaches could find therapists that they could partner with and become part of a team if necessary. But it's a safety issue. When we work with people who've had these experiences, we want to be sure that we're doing no harm. And this is an at-risk population, so it's important to get educated.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about Assist. I know you mentioned it, but what does Assist do specifically?
Assist specifically exists to support the experiencer, and they have an online experiencer forum, and to train mental health professionals on differential diagnosis, so that if somebody comes in, they can, with a spiritual experience or believes are having a spiritual emergency, they can diagnose more clearly if they are in a state of psychosis or in a state of acute spiritual emergency, or perhaps they may have a dual diagnosis of a mental health issue along with the spiritual emergency. So that's possible as well. So we did a lot of training. We also trained peer support group facilitators, and that was part of my job as well. I organized the conferences and trained peer support facilitators.
That's cool. And how does that differ with what you're doing now with ITTC, doing spiritual integration coaching certification programs?
Right. Well, I served on the board for 6 years, and I left at the December of 2021. And just continued to work in my private practice in my school at the Institute of Transformational and Transpersonal Coaching. And so the coaching training is very different. So I teach coaches how to work with people who believe they've had a nonlinear, non-ordinary experience, however that might happen. So I've broken down the 120 some odd types of experiences into 28 different categories of experiences. And I teach them specifically about each category of experience and what specific issues might arise. There's a lot of crossover on those different categories of experience. There's some basics on how to work with people, but there are other experiences that may need a little bit more or a little different type of investigation. But the basic premise for coaching, coaching is about taking action.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching is about creating something, making something happen, and discovering what we've learned throughout our life experience and what's in the way of us getting what we want, and then taking that information and moving forward. In spiritual integration coaching, it's very much about meaning making and supporting someone in developing their own meaning. Because one of the things that happens when you start telling people about your experience, they're going to label it for you. Oh, that sounds like Kundalini. Oh, that sounds like this. Oh, that sounds like that. And it may be, and it may not be. But the person who's had the experience may not have an opportunity to define it for themselves and create a meaning for themselves before they're labeled by some well-meaning person. Mm-hmm. So in spiritual integration coaching, what we're looking for, when people have these transformative nonlinear experiences, very often their worldview changes, their values change, what's important in life changes. They may have been in a job or a career for quite a long time. I've worked with young people in college where they decided to change their major, right? And had to go home and say, gee, I'm not going to be a petroleum engineer, mom and dad. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to go into psychology, or I'm going to go into this. And the parents are like, what? There's no money in psychology, right? What do you mean you're not going to be a petroleum engineer? And so, helping people come to terms with their value shifts and really examine what's still important from their life prior to the experience that they don't want to change, and they don't want it to change, and what they do want to change, and then how those changes are going to happen. So we slowly walk people through that. But in my model, what I teach is to teach the coach to help the client connect to their higher self, their spirit, the them that God created, the them that their creator created before all the enculturation, to get access to their truth, and then work with the coaching.
Well, that's cool. You mentioned taking action, and that's one thing that I was really happy to hear, is because I feel like so many people who have had spiritual experiences, and this is maybe one thing people on the call tonight could answer when they talk to Elizabeth, is they end up getting shut down. It seems like there's no place or a way for them to take action on their own, or they don't know what happened to them. They're spending years either in silence or doing their own research and not really having access to the right, papers or books or conversations or people or videos to help them with that. And that's one thing that I think a coach who's had that experience and training could help them with. And I've also talked about having a spiritual development framework, just a guideline for helping you understand this spiritual walk that you're embarking on after you've had these experiences you can't explain. But I see that as being one positive step that you could take to help you get over things a lot quicker, or understand things a lot quicker, or even assimilate and integrate those things quicker as well.
Absolutely, to assimilate and integrate quicker. When I started doing this work, people had experiences 10 and 20 years prior to visiting with them that still had not been integrated and assimilated into their life, where they were really living in a life that didn't fit them, but they didn't know how to do it differently, or they knew that if they did do it differently, they would lose everybody in the life they had. right? That was the fear. And so there was always this part of them that was longing and unfulfilled, and some, unfortunately, dying inside. Their spirit was dying because they couldn't express and function in the paradigm that exists for them only internally. But man, let me tell you, in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, I've talked to people who, because there is more information out there, and because we're talking about it more, are integrating in 2 years, 3 years. And that's fascinating to me after, for years watching people suffer for decades. I mean, some people 30, 40 years.
Right. And I've heard of people 15, 20 years, especially after some near-death experiences, who they talk to family and friends and they just were immediately shut down, and they never talked to anyone for 20 years until they met someone just in passing who knew stuff about what they had experienced.
Right.
But I also think too that there's a lot of what is it, like self-respect you need to develop, or self-love for yourself, to get the courage to be able to talk and have the perseverance to keep going on with what you've experienced. And just like this lady saying, I'm not going to take this lying down. We need to stand up and fight, especially in the environment that you were talking about, with people who had a set understanding of what life and reality was, and notions or ideas about what wasn't right, or what was right. So I see that as a lot of doing self-development with people as part of the spiritual integration coaching process too. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah, we call it psycho-spiritual development for a reason. Because if you don't develop your psychology while your spiritual nature is forming, and or forming at any age, I should say, or your spiritual interests are forming, there's a real danger of spiritually bypassing aspects of your psyche and your emotional and mental well-being, and not addressing them, and then they come back later to bite you in the butt, emotionally and mentally. So it needs to be balanced between psychological and spiritual development.
And just to sort of take that a couple steps further, there's people who want to go out and have Kundalini experiences, who want to go out and learn how to go out of body and how to have all these experiences, either, for themselves or to help them understand the spiritual side of themselves. But they could get in trouble doing things on their own. I like to say, it's the old fear, fools go where angels fear to tread. But I've heard of people, who have had problems trying to do things on their own, or not having a mentor or a coach or somebody who's been there, done that, who could help them understand what it is and get them to do it in the right order or the right cadence.
Yeah, that's right. I was one of those people. I left the church at 23 and was still seeking God, and couldn't find God in a church at that time, could not find God in church, and started meditation. There was no Buddhist meditation instructor or any meditation instructor in Lubbock, Texas, at that time. And it was 1988. And so I bought a book on Buddhism and meditation and started practicing meditation and deep breath work. And by the time I was, 28, 29, in a Kundalini awakening, which I sure didn't know that that's what was going on. I had no idea that I'd had a Kundalini awakening until probably 41, 42.
Wow.
Yeah.
And who told you about that, or helped you understand?
I mean, opening this community, and people are coming to me saying, I was, have a Kundalini awakening. I'm like, what the hell is that? Let's get some books.
Yeah.
And I was like, as I was reading, like I said, I'm out here in the Wild West by myself, right? And so as I was reading and studying, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
no wonder, right? Why I was going through those problems at that time. I was just extremely fortunate. I had two children that I was raising, a husband, a very prosperous business that kept us very busy. And I had a lot of responsibility to keep me grounded and the desire to be grounded for my children and my family. Right. So I feel like I had some sort of, and Dr. Hawkins, one of my teachers, would have called it spiritual merit, probably from a past life, that I could stay grounded during that time. Because I have talked to people who were not fortunate enough to stay grounded at that time when they had children to raise. So,
Yeah. Well, spiritual experiences can really just change your life, sometimes overnight, but sometimes over a period of years.
that's right.
And the consequences can happen just as fast or take just as long as well. And a lot of times people feel like things are slipping away, things are changing, and they have no control. And I guess that could almost throw you into a spiritual emergency, as if you'd want to call it that.
Yeah. If I said it myself during that time that I don't know who I am. And I said, I don't know who I am. It's very confusing to not know who you are. What do you mean you don't know who you are?
Mm.
You're Elizabeth Sabet. You have two children. You're this, you're that, you're this. But no, I'm not any of that. It's very confusing and disturbing. And I've talked to many people at that stage of their development where they don't know who they are. And it's very disturbing.
Mm. So how would you coach someone who comes to you saying that, to help them
Talk about,
understand?
right. We talk about where they've been, who they've been so far, like who are they not any longer, right?
Mm.
So who have you been up until now? When did it start changing for you? How has this changed your values? How are your values in flux? And so, who do you think you are? Who do you think you might be? And they may not have an answer. They may not have an answer, or they may have an answer. Well, I'm a child of the universe. I'm a child of God. Okay. It's a great place to start. That's a great place to start. And so during that time, stabilization and grounding is really important, and they need stability.
Mm.
And you have to pay attention to, do they have the basics of life met? Do they have a place to stay? Are they able to work? If they have income, are they eating properly? Are they sleeping? You have to double check in that state where they are with the basics. And if they're having problems sleeping. And so, first of all, like I said, doing that well check and then helping them find the resources that they need, or maybe having conversations with loved ones. And then talk to them about what might be happening and not say, oh, you're going through a spiritual emergency or you're going through a spiritual awakening. And, you don't want to label what's happening for people. You give them information about what might be happening for them. You can ask them, if they've had any trauma that they haven't had any therapy for, and have they considered therapy for that? But we want to be careful that we're not pathologizing the state that they're in.
Mm.
Right? So helping them understand that it's possible that there may be something organic happening. It's possible that their identity might be shifting, and they might be what's called awakening from their enculturated understanding of themselves. The them that the culture created and their life experience created, and in the process of discovering who they are beyond that, and discovering the transpersonal self. And that takes time to develop an understanding of. And until then, let's take a look at what they need right now. And every person's different. What do you need to feel more comfortable during this period? And when we say grounded to people, sometimes people don't want to be grounded. If they're having they don't want to be grounded out of the experience. And sometimes, and it's important to not push people to be grounded. It's important to see if they have what they need and to find out what they need. Well, in some questions that we can ask them is, what would help you feel a little bit more comfortable through this process as you're waiting to discover who you are? Right?
So,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right, Stephen. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Stephen asked a question. Go ahead. Doesn't
Oh,
recognize
what? Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Stephen Taylor asked a question in chat. He said, a lot of people's nervous system doesn't recognize being grounded. Just a comment.
Right. Stephen, you are muted.
You're still muted, Stephen.
There you go.
It's more of a statement than a question. Just in my own experience with helping people as a shaman and energy healer. And
That's right. They can't recognize groundedness.
No, and easing them into that very carefully. Everyone's different, but that's definitely the number one thing that I recognize, especially someone who's just starting to realize their spiritual enlightenment. And a lot of them really are scared. But yeah, that's what I recognize as just it's very practical place to start, that their nervous system just isn't used to it.
That's right. It's such a higher frequency of that awareness is such a higher frequency than what their body's used to holding. And the body has to acclimate to that frequency.
Yes.
So Elizabeth, what are some of the dangers of not being able to, or when people are in this state, after they've had spiritual experiences, what are some of the dangers that need to be avoided, if you're talking to someone who's had those experiences, because I know you're trained and coaches are trained in how to interact with them, but what are some of the ways that people can inadvertently, consciously, unconsciously hurt someone who's had a spiritual experience?
Well, most people are well-meaning and trying to be helpful. But again, labeling their experience for them, making a meaning about it for them. Sometimes people will tell them, oh, you just need to meditate more. Oh, you need to do breath work. Well, sometimes meditation and breath work can accelerate the process, and they may need to stop meditating and stop doing breath work, right? So sometimes I find having people put their hands on their body for them to decide, put both hands on the body, one on the gut, one on the chest, and feel. You all might want to try this right now and feel which hand feels better where. You want to try that right now with me?
Sure.
Yeah. So just put your hands on your chest or in your gut and see which feels better for you. One of them might feel better than the other. And so helping people self-regulate is really important, and bringing that term up to them, self-regulation, is really important. And sometimes they might need co-regulation, where they can't feel comfortable themselves and they might need help to feel more comfortable. And I like to call it feeling more comfortable, right? We typically call it grounded, but just feeling a little bit more comfortable and helping people feel just a little bit more comfortable, and breathing into the body, just slowly breathing into the body slowly, feeling the hands on the body, bringing more body awareness is sometimes just enough to help people feel a little bit more comfortable in the process. And then they can ask themselves the question, I need right now. What do I want right now? What do I need right now? Mm-hmm. And that's a good way of helping somebody without causing any harm, and just supporting them and getting their needs met in that moment. Like, I just need somebody to listen to me. Okay, great.
That's good.
And you can ask, what does having somebody listen to you bring to you? What does that help you feel when somebody listens to you? So you ask them these questions, the what and the how questions, so that you're helping them find their own answers, and you're helping them articulate, right, in their own words, what they need and why it's important. So helping people find distinguishing language just by asking simple what and how questions can be very helpful.
I like that. What you're saying is not telling someone what's wrong with them, but letting them find out for themselves. I think you even said it once before. You're robbing them of that experience in a way or a sense. I forget exactly what you were saying before.
Right.
What
We
was
want
said.
to empower people to be able to language their meaning and their needs themselves. Yeah. I'm interested in Stephen being a shaman, working with people in these states too. What techniques you use.
I don't have one technique. It really depends on the person,
That's right. Yeah.
and I'll let them give me a basic, what's the problem? But then I'll use my intuition, and I actually find that to be very fast for the solution. I'm also very creative with the visualizations, whether I'm surrounding the human being with beams of light as it's releasing that negative energy. So I will get the person sometimes to close their eyes with me, and I'll talk them through it, as we're both visualizing this energy that's surrounding the human and it's releasing. And as far as keeping them grounded, that really depends on the person. I really like using the creative side of things, visually being very, very creative. And I absolutely try to empower them and encourage them to practice it. I also use a pendulum to get my readings, but I also use it for deneutralizing the situation or neutralizing a situation. There's no cookie cutter way that I do it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Every person is different. And that's why we ask, right? So not everybody has Stephen's gifts, right? So not everybody is a shaman or an energy healer. Not everybody has these gifts. So when you're not using nonlinear gifts, you simply use your gift of presence and respect, unconditional positive regard, and I also like the term unconditional respectful curiosity. To be respectfully curious about how this person is experiencing themselves and any phenomena that they are recognizing and experiencing as well. And what would be helpful, asking what would be helpful. And sometimes people don't know what would be helpful. They simply don't know. And so that's when you go to the basics and you can ask, there's, it's such a broad question and it's such a broad topic with so many people having different types of experiences and different backgrounds and different past lives that could be influencing their experience as well. The main thing for a non-professional, for somebody who's wanting to be a good friend, a good spiritual friend, is to remain curious and take care of basic needs and to help them find resources. Resources are so helpful. When people say, oh my gosh, I wish I had this information 10 years ago, or oh my gosh, I wish I would have known this is what's going on with me. Okay, now I have something to focus my attention on and I can review it. I can look at it I can see if there's an answer for me here. So helping people to find the resources is really, really important. You want to have a directory of resources that you can refer people to. Books, movies, music. Sometimes music can be very helpful in helping people self-regulate as well. And don't forget to use music. And then art, as Jim was showing us, Jose's artwork. Artwork can be very influential in people making their own art, and drawing as well can be very influential in integrating energies that they're trying to, and frequencies that they're trying to realize in their physical system. So there's a lot of things that need normalization, and everybody's different, and it takes a different amount of time for everybody. So for some people, they need to normalize that the experience happened to begin with. For other people, it's not the fact that the experience happened, it's the consequences of the shifts that they're going through in their thinking and feeling and values that they need support with. So again, it's such a diverse topic. That's why your mind needs to be open. And the other thing is your response, to have that warm presence and that open response. Sometimes you're going to hear very shocking things. It could be alien contact, they could be taken on a ship, alien ship. It could be, all sorts of manners of strange experiences. And it's really important that you keep your face. That's so interesting. Oh my goodness. Tell me what that was like for you, So getting them to talk about what it was like for them in that experience is really important. Giving them permission to talk.
As you were saying that, Elizabeth, I was thinking about my own mother. As she was approaching the end of her life, she started talking about experiences she had at night, as having people come to her and things like that. And my sister would shut her down, and she would just stop talking about it. And then I found out that this thing was going on, and so I opened her up again. But it's almost like people at all ages need spiritual coaching or help with spiritual experiences. And I don't know if there's any difference in the prevalence of one type of experience as opposed to another with people at different stages in their life, or if it can be all over the map at all different ages.
Yeah, I don't think we know those numbers. In my experience, it's prevalent at any age, all ages, children, teenagers, in the 20s, 30. Well, now because of psychedelics, plant medicine, more people are meditating and doing yoga. So people in their 30s and 40s are usually pretty busy with life. Okay. It's not that too many high vibe people in one room.
Yeah, sorry about that. The last
No, it's my internet. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, the last thing we heard was people in their 30s and 40s are busy with doing other things.
Yeah, actually, we're starting. People in their 40s were really starting in 2012. People just started in the Hope meetings from 2007 to 2012. People were talking a little bit about it, or would talk a little bit, but my goodness, from 2012 forward, people came out of the woodwork with spiritual experiences and new experiences. So we're accelerating. And, when I first started doing this work, it was mostly the younger people, the older people, maybe people in their early 20s. But after 2012, there were more people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, for sure, talking about experiences.
Well, that's cool. So we've talked for about 45 minutes, and I'd like to open the floor up for questions. People on the line who have a question, if you would, go to reactions, and there's a way you can raise your hand there. and then we'll recognize you and you can unmute your line and ask Elizabeth a question. So we'll start with Jenny. Jenny Pitts.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Elizabeth, and your knowledge and experience, and everybody else for being here. I have a gazillion questions, although I'm certain that a lot of them are not answerable. But one of my questions is, so I've been through, it's essentially, it's been 10 years since this process started, and I did not know what it was, and I got all kinds of wrong diagnoses. I was very physically sick, but I was also dealing with this awakening. And I was like you, when I encountered somebody, it was a body worker who told me, you're having a Kundalini awakening. And I said, a Kunda what? A Kunda what? What was that? And that was in 2018. So, and then the process has just continued, and I feel like I'm in a place now where I can really start to process what in the world happened. Like for years, I was just trying to stay alive.
Right.
So one of my questions that, I was in the context of this is, are there any like initiatives or plans on a more of a mass scale, if you will, to get the information out there about this? Because like I said, the more that my awakening progressed, because I do believe it's been going on for longer than 10 years. I think it was trying to come and instead of happening and somebody saying, I think you might be trying to have an awakening, I was medicated. I was told I had bipolar. It's been a hell of a journey this lifetime. So I'm just thinking about like psychiatrists and the number of psychologists and counselors and social workers I went to, because I was having physical pain, severe physical pain, but I was also having a lot of psych symptoms. And now I understand that they were all essentially nervous system, just like in total survival. So, and then it wasn't until I had a surgery, and it was actually the third surgery that I had, that my Kriyas started, and I basically started essentially unraveling. So I guess I know I'm sharing a lot of my experience, but I'm just curious because I know I came across the book, The Stormy Search for the Self. I came across all these other books that Stanislav Grof wrote along with other people, including what's the medical doctor, Lee, whatever his name is. So
Yes.
it's out there. The stuff is out there, but it's not anywhere near in the mainstream. And so I guess that's my question is, are there any like, bigger initiatives to try to get this information into the mainstream so that, it's like people select into what you're talking about, right? They sign up to learn about this rather than it being a top-down approach of information. It's more like a bottom-up approach. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's one of the things that we wanted to work on at Assist, was to change there's two agencies in the United States that dictate what mental health professionals, depending on their licensure, which kind of mental health professional they are, what their curriculum is. And they would have to change the curriculum, and then it would change at the collegiate level. And we want differential diagnosis between spiritual emergence and emergency to be in that required curriculum. Unfortunately, this is considered transpersonal psychology, which is still by mainstream considered fringe psychology. And what's required, pardon me, is more research. Probably another 10 to 15 years of research. Now, there is an organization called the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium. You can look it up. It's called the EPRC.org.
Can you repeat that or put it in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. Let me put
awesome. Yes, thank you. Because I'm finding some things, like I've heard about Assist now, and there's actually a Spiritual Emergence Anonymous, which is a 12-step group that
that's a wonderful organization.
So, but it's all it's not, there's not a spearhead, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Spiritual Anonymous, that one is a great organization. The person who created that was on the Assist board. I worked with her. Wonderful lady, very well researched and knowledgeable in her field. So the EPRC has put together a consortium of researchers all over the world. in a diverse fields between neurobiology and consciousness researchers and other types of researchers to do research, to develop funding for research, which is extremely hard to develop funding for research, but they have a nonprofit arm that's fundraising for research. And it's a place where researchers can share their work together and maybe collaborate. So they're doing what they can, and they're involved in, their members are involved in quite a bit of research right now. But I anticipate this is going to be a hard thing. Just getting the diagnosis code for spiritual and religious problems into the DSM took a couple of fights to get in there.
Could you elaborate on the DSM for people who aren't familiar with it?
Diagnostic Statistic Manual. It's when you go to a mental health professional and they look for what's wrong with you, what your pathology is, and there's a code there, and they're looking for how your symptoms fit into a particular diagnostic code. And they label you with that code in your medical records, like what happened to you, Jenny. So acute phase spiritual emergency can often mimic schizophrenia and schizophreniform, other schizophreniform diagnoses, and bipolar disorder. And the research, the curriculum that Dr. Janice Holden created when she was a professor at the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, is absolutely stunningly fabulous and should be in every university. And I know that there are some universities, including Texas Tech, where I'm from, that was looking to set up a graduate certificate program for it, which again would be an elective, right? But it would be advertised by the university. So I don't know how successful she's been at getting these graduate certificate programs set up at different universities. But I know at one point she said that was, you know, what she wanted to see happen to her work after she graduated. So we have to hold on, create grassroots support, grassroots education. Jenny, there is on the Assist website under their resources, they have a document that you can download, and it's the competency guideline for professionals. It's very old in as far as research terms is concerned, but it's a good document to take to a mental health professional. And I absolutely advocate that anybody who works with people that is going through the mental health system, who believes they're having awakening symptoms or spiritually transformative experiences or a spiritual emergency, that you have this in your hard drive, you email it to them, you print it out. If you're a person, give it to them, give them a couple copies, tell them to take one to their mental health professional and leave it in their office when they go. And so we have to become our own advocate in these situations. There are some resources. It's got, I think, 4 or 5 pages of resources and other research. Okay.
Thank you for all that. I really appreciate it. I actually have PTSD from counselors and mental health professionals now, in part as a result of all of this. Like, I'm actually scared of that. And now I'm not, now I know it's wrong. My health is better. Everything's like, I needed to get all the trauma out, I guess. And this was the route. So anyway, I was just curious, and I guess it's going to be one of those things. I mean, you know, we have to evolve, right? Like the homosexuality used to be in the DSM, you know, and then they took it out. So it's like, maybe it's just going to take more time, you know, like the movement, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross movement, you know, this whole normalization of the dying process not being something super scary. You know, it's just going to take a lot of us from grassroots places, and, you know, so, and I see that happening, and I'm grateful to still be here, to be honest with you. I'm lucky to be alive. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your sharing.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing and for making it through. I'm sorry you had such a hard time. Unfortunately, your experience is common. I'm very sorry for that. Yeah.
And for the people on the call, I put a YouTube link to a presentation that a lady did, Dorothy Walters, on her Kundalini experience. So it's there in the chat if you'd like to pick that up.
Yeah. Kundalini is a spiritual house clean, and it cleans the central nervous system. It cleans those stuck energies from the soul. Many people believe that the body is the subconscious mind, and that we store all of these resistances to spiritual development, guilt, shame, fear of guilt and shame, all those, emergency emotions, hatred, greed, all of the emergency emotions are stored in our etheric body. And when we decide what to work on, when we come into this life, those energies are in our field. They're either in our aura or in our chakras, in our body, and they can get stuck in different parts of the body. And the Kundalini comes to clean that out. And it can be quite physically painful. People can become quite sick. Not everybody does. Not everybody has a traumatic Kundalini awakening. But this is why it's dangerous to go seeking to raise the Kundalini without doing trauma work. If you've had trauma, without doing some shadow work, right? Working on developing your skills of your higher nature, and doing it alone, so we have to be careful and respectful of this energy, because it's a tough one. Yeah.
So Elizabeth, what about people who have had like a near-death experience and then all of a sudden develop psychic or spiritual skills?
Yeah, crisis of spiritual openings. Yes.
Yes. How do you deal with that? Because it seems like, the experience is compounded by some of these strange things that people have happening to them that they didn't have before.
Right. They're very scary for some people. They're very disturbing. And I've worked with many people that have had a crisis of psychic opening. And often it is a near-death experience that can cause it. But it can also be an illness. It can be the death of a loved one. It can be any crisis. It could also just be that your soul is ripe for it, and that it's time for your soul to get to work and, use those gifts. So there could be many reasons why it happens. But it can be disturbing, right? Like, am I crazy? Am I making things up? I recently worked with a woman who became so psychic that she was concerned that she made her neighbor's relationship go bad and made them get divorced, because she was having all of these thoughts about them having a bad relationship and whatever. And from the outside, they look like a perfect family, right? And so she was taking responsibility for these negative things happening. And so once you help people understand that psychic connection is normal, and it's also scientific, and we can explain the science behind receiving information and explain the mechanics of how it's possible that we receive it, and that once the brain has become opened to it, the consciousness has become loosened from the physical body, is one way that I think Jan talked about it, that for whatever reason, the consciousness becomes loosened from the body, and a trauma will do that. So that makes your system more sensitive to information that you can't see, and you're picking it up differently. And once we help normalize that and assure them, right? Now the big scary one is when they're hearing voices. And then how do you know, right? Because being in well-meaning, we don't want to misdiagnose somebody. But how do we know that they are not schizophrenic and hearing voices that are really not there, or that they are really having a spiritual awakening and a crisis of psychic opening, or that there is not an attempted possession that is, a possession that's in the attempt where they're trying to be, something is trying to possess them. We don't like to talk about these things in the spiritual circle because we want to stay all love and light and keep that stuff away, right? But the reality is that it happens a lot and more than people. Stephen, thank you for your affirmation, but it happens a lot. And so we have to be very careful with these things, right? I witnessed a woman who everybody said, oh, you got Kundalini, and she's in physical pain. And as it turns out, she was diagnosed with dystonia. Okay. And she really had a muscle disorder, a very painful muscle disorder that wasn't, being treated for years and misdiagnosed as Kundalini. So was she having Kundalini and dystonia? I don't think so, because she didn't have any of the other classic experiences of Kundalini, but her body was twisting and jerking and looking like it was going into spontaneous kriyas, but it was dystonia. So I've worked with people who and I say this as a coach that's been sat in the training for several years of the therapist training. And I can't diagnose anybody, but I've had enough experience with the professionals to have a better idea of what I'm looking at. And I had a gentleman call me who was, under an attack by dark nonlinear beings. And I asked him, he was, very scared, very ungrounded. I asked him if he could go outside and go barefoot. Like, was there somewhere he could go out in the dirt or in the grass and barefoot, sit next to a tree, and let the earth support this man? And he said, oh no, I can't go out there. They won't let me go out there. And I was like, oh, okay, who's not letting you go out there? And he said, the demons wouldn't let him go outside, and that they were telling him that he had to be like them, and they were holding him down and pouring demon blood in his mouth to make him like them. And he said that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and that nobody will believe him, that there are demons that are torturing him because he has schizophrenia. I have to tell you, I think there were demons torturing that man. And I've had a little shamanic training, but I don't present as a shaman. But so I called a friend of mine who is a shaman instructor and said, I need some help with this one. I really do feel like this guy is telling me the truth, and I'll tell you why. Because I hung up the phone with him, and so I started doing my work that I do when I'm faced with those kinds of beings, and when I hung up the phone, that evil was outside my back door. And I walked past my back door and I was like, oh, hell no, y'all don't have permission. And they couldn't get in. They were trying to get in, but they didn't have permission to get in. Okay. And so I was like, y'all need to go back where you came from. And so, that was my like, oh yeah, okay, we're dealing with it. And I really believe he does have schizophrenia. So unfortunately, so when I talked to my shaman friend, he said, look, unfortunately, because I was trying to find a shaman in his state that would be close by, that might be able to see if they would go help him. And he said, unfortunately, we could probably find somebody. But unfortunately, when somebody's mind is very weak and they lack a sense of self, we can get rid of them temporarily, but they're going to come back. Right. And so you have to be careful when you're working with people that are dealing with these things. You have to have a strong sense of self yourself. You have to be grounded in your own sense of being. You have to know where your protection comes from, and you have to be strong and stern in your boundaries, whether you're dealing with people in flesh and blood, or beings without skin and bones on. Okay. So you have to carry that presence of authority and self-authority if you're going to support people that are going through something like that. And you have to set boundaries and leave them to the professionals that are trained to work in those realms. Yeah.
No, that was good. Does anyone else have any questions for Elizabeth? Thank you.
Yeah.
Raise your hand or unmute your mic. We've got a small enough group to where you could just unmute your mic and ask a question.
I have a question. Thank you, Elizabeth, for a very good presentation and very informative. And I have maybe a request, not necessarily a question, but I am intuitive healing coach, and I do a lot of work using my energy healing and Akashic Records reading and mediumship, spiritual mediumship. And I often come across people who do have connections with beings from another realm.
Mhm.
And it takes a lot to release that energy. But once the energy is released, it's a big relief. I have worked with a young lady who had auditory schizophrenia. In other words, she was hearing voices. She may not have been schizophrenic, but she was hearing voices that were very annoying and would not leave her alone. And we had a couple of sessions, and she was absolved of that problem. So there are places you can go to sort of know the source of these aberrant things that come at you, wherever they
Yeah.
come from or whatever they're involved in. So that's been just one of my experiences. But of late, I have been working more with the survivors of sexual assault.
Mm.
And one of the things that spiritual emergencies and women have in common is that bolus of energy that can come up. And it's so overwhelming at one point in time that it's very difficult to handle.
Yes.
And I see it in women who are in their, especially older years, 40s, 50s, raising a family, and they have suppressed memories of sexual assault for years. And for some reason, that's a hot spot. That's where they tend to come up.
Yeah.
My position is I'm not a professional psychologist or psychiatrist, so I am partnering with psychologists. And my question to you is, could you be, I'm asking for help here, could you be a resource as far as recommending psychologists that have experience in that area, but especially in the area of when something so concentrated and in such a big quantity starts coming up? Because when those memories of assault start coming up, they just keep coming and they don't stop, and it's really overwhelming.
That's
So
right.
that's what I need help with. At that point, it becomes an emergency for that person, and they need to be referred, or they need, I can do some clearing, but I really feel like there needs to be a licensed psychologist on board. I do have a colleague in Canada, and I have one in Great Britain, and they're willing to help. But my question is, how do you get them referred immediately to someone who could help them, who's a licensed psychologist?
So I train my coaches to get those lists of referrals in their area. But so often we do not work with people who are in our local area, right?
Right.
I recommend that they go to a certified trauma therapist, and there's different forms of trauma therapy. There's EMDR, which seems to be pretty effective way to rewire the brain. There's also psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And so there are therapists who are trained in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Now, those are depending on the states. Now, right now in the US, Colorado and Oregon are the only two states who have decriminalized psilocybin. And I'm working with a group of ladies in the Denver area right now. And one of those ladies is working with the Colorado legislature to prepare rules and regs for when psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy will be approved. Supposedly it was going to be in August. We'll see when that's going to happen in the US. But in these cases, I've looked up. If I know somebody in that town, I'll ask for a referral and see if they know somebody that they've been to that I can get a good referral from. If not, I will help them search the web for somebody in their area, because when that comes up, when that trauma comes up, they sometimes can't find their own resources.
Yeah.
So you can ask if they want you to help them find somebody, but they have to choose. So you want to find 2 or 3 trauma certified therapists to refer them to, and I tell people to interview the therapist and see how they feel, get a feel for the therapist.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, from my perspective, if it's happening and it's an emergency, I have certain things I can do. I can ground, I can clear. But I feel like just staying with them for a while would be quite important. It's just that what bothers me is in an ultimate crisis, the energy level is so high. I feel like maybe there's a protocol or some steps I should take.
So helping people discharge that energy and giving them some techniques to help discharge that energy is helpful, again, and to help self-regulate, to see if they have somebody in their life that can help them co-regulate. Sometimes, to be held, do they have a partner that they can share this with and ask that partner to hold them? Do they feel comfortable being held by their partner? And then to teach them some self-regulation techniques, like I talked about, hands on the body, especially for sexual abuse, victims of sexual abuse, getting back in touch with the body, because you leave the body when those memories flood, they're leaving the body. Okay, they're not in touch with their body.
Yeah.
Okay, and so breathing, grounding, and going outside, asking for support from a loved one for co-regulation. If they have a pet that can help them co-regulate and hold their pet, and to call a friend, but to not regulate alone until they can see a therapist.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's
ask them, and I always ask them. So there's another thing that you can do in that moment, is when it's really flooding and they're losing control, is you can call them by their name. I'm just going to say, Sheila, tell me 3 things you can see with your eyes. And then you're going to tell me 3 things. Okay, tell me 3 things you can hear with your ears. Okay, now tell me 3 things you can feel on your body. Okay, that pattern interrupt is immediate. It only works when somebody does it for them. You can tell them, okay, when you get to this point, I want you to practice 3 things you can see. Stop and say it out loud. The 3 things you can see, hear, and feel.
Yeah,
And
I've heard that.
And
it's
then
a good
put your
way of
hands on your
grounding.
body, breathe. Yeah. So the right hand is a symbol of the adult. The left hand is a symbol of the child, the innocent us. Okay, the innocence. Right. So, if my left hand goes on my chest and my right hand is on my gut, my adult is available to steady and bring love to my child. My child is needing love. So I'm going to bring, and I share this information with them. Right.
Okay.
But if it's reversed and my adult is needing support, and my inner child has strength to support anything that my adult is going through, and help them develop that conversation between the healthy adult that they do have on board, and they're your client. So that you can say, I know you have a healthy adult on board because I know you can do this and do this and do that, and you've done this and you've done that. And so you want to affirm what that healthy adult looks like to them, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so you want to affirm where their strengths are and give permission for the innocence within them that needs to be comforted in any way, you know, where it
That's
is.
very helpful. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I hadn't thought about it in terms of child and adult, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And thank you for your work too and holding space for people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's good. Any other questions for Elizabeth? Well, while we're waiting, Elizabeth, could you throw up the website link for your ITTC group
Oh, sure, sure. Thank you
so
for asking.
people can go get to it? I know we've put it on some of the meeting announcements and emails that have gone around, but it's good to have that up again.
Yeah. So I've started a new program because becoming a coach is so rigorous that many people say, oh, you know, I want to be somebody who has an impact. I want to be somebody who influences change. And when they start the program, they are like, whoa, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, I didn't know I was going to be all of this and have to deal with this stuff, because a lot of coaching is noticing yourself while you're in the chair with your client and paying really close attention to what's arising within yourself. And so I broke the program up so it's not quite so long for people. And the first part of the program is just a beginner's program, and to help people coach yourself so that you can create the impact that you want to create in the world and create the influence you want to create. So whether you're a healer or you want to be a coach or you're wanting to create some other change or impact in the world, whether you want to be a coach or not, this program is geared towards helping you become a more conscious leader and developing all the courage and the skills that you need to go out and to create change. So you're going to learn how to coach yourself, and then you're going to learn how to take that and use that as the basics for coaching someone else. So you either can take this course for learning how to support yourself in being a change maker or an influencer, and or you can use it as the beginning part and then see if coaching is for you, and if you want to become either a spiritual integration coach or a transformational transpersonal coach. So, and then I also run a conscious business development course where we connect to your inner teacher, your higher self, before you start any business endeavor, or if you're, you know, in the middle of your business and you're being sucked dry by your business, to get back into your spirit and let your spirit direct your business to what I call all the bottom lines of your life are taken care of. Your spirit's bottom line and your soul's bottom line before your financial bottom line, so that you know that you're building your income based on your truest essence and your highest values. Because we really can live from our highest values. And people think they can't and still make money, but you can.
I think that's one of the good outcomes of spiritual integration coaching, and not to do a plug for that, but it's just the wholeness, the sense of completeness, and the integration of your experience with yourself. I think that's a positive thing that helps position people for those opportunities to create change. Because
It's so rewarding. Yeah.
yeah. So thank you for that. And then we also have a panel of spiritual integration coaches that are going to be talking in a couple weeks, and I'll put that link up in the chat. So we have 3 people that were trained by Elizabeth's organization, Kendall McCullough, Needy Lozada, and Jessica Hernandez, and they're going to talk about spiritual integration coaching, but also nurturing young spiritual explorers. And we'll be talking about that in a couple weeks. So we'd like to see you there, and hope you found some things interesting here that we can add on to when we talk with that panel. Jenny, you raised your hand.
Yeah, just real fast. Elizabeth, I was curious with your program, what kind of educational background people need to have. You know, my background is in psychology, but it's not in traditional mental health psychology. So, and I was just curious, or is that required to have some sort of a mental health degree?
No, not for coaching. Now, if somebody has no previous coaching education, then they have to take this beginning course before they go into the spiritual integration coaching course. If they have previous coaching education or mental health education, then they can take the spiritual integration coaching course. So
Okay.
I've had some people take both programs at once, those high achievers take both programs at once because they want to, graduate quickly. And then I've had people that they just take one at a time and then take the spiritual integration coaching program at the end. Because again, it is so the therapists, they can just start right at the spiritual integration coaching program, right? And so coaching is very different from therapy. It's very different. Kendall, that you'll be visiting with in a couple weeks, he started, his graduate work to become a therapist, and decided that that's not how he wanted to work with people. And he still, even though he didn't finish his graduate, certificate for counseling, he still had a hard switching from the therapeutic model to the coaching model, where the therapeutic model is, pathology, and the coaching model is about empowerment and wholeness, seeing our clients from their whole self.
That makes sense. Thank you for that. Yeah, because one of the things I'm working through is my process destroyed the career I worked really hard for, and I try not to be resentful because I try to tell myself that was not, but I'm trying to. So, that's one of the reasons I'm hopping on all these, is just trying to figure out what people do with this after they come out of all this process. Like, how do they reconstruct their lives in terms of work and job? And so thank you for that.
That's what we help them do. That's what we help them do. Reconstruct based on their connection and what their spirit is telling them about who they are and what their work in the world is. Yeah. But what I would say is just shoot me an email if you want to use the contact form on that website, and then we can take a look at your education background, and you could probably just start at the spiritual integration coaching, or you might want to take the beginning to get the background of coaching if you don't, if you're shifting from that model. But we could talk about that and see where you fit.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. So Elizabeth, it's been great having you on. Great to see you and talk with you again. And I know everyone's gotten something from this conversation. So for everyone on the call, thank you all for attending, and we're happy that you were here with us. I hope you learned something, and that you'll join us again in 2 weeks when we talk about spiritual integration coaching with a panel of coaches from Elizabeth's ITTC organization.
Thank you, everybody. It was so good to meet y'all.